click of the magnetic lock was deafening in the cathedral-like silence of the Viridian Solutions lobby. For Arthur Pendleton, it was the sound of control. For the man on the other side of the glass, it was the sound of a $10 million decision being proven right. The man outside, dressed in a simple gray hoodie and jeans, didn't look like he belonged. He looked, in Arthur's professional opinion, like a problem. What Arthur didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that this problem was Damian Cross, the billionaire CEO of Nexus Dynamics. And he hadn't come to make a deal. He'd come to deliver the eulogy for one, a deal he had already canceled just 1 hour before. Arthur was about to learn that the most expensive thing in the world isn't a failed contract, it's a closed mind. Damian Cross hated ties. He hated the starchy formality of boardrooms, the synthetic smiles of client lunches, and the entire corporate theater that valued appearance over substance. From his corner office on the 55th floor, overlooking the sprawling metropolis, he could see the Viridian Solutions Tower just 3 blocks away. It was a monument of glass and steel, a perfect symbol of the company itself. Shiny on the outside, but as he'd recently discovered, structurally unsound on the inside. His own company, Nexus Dynamics, was the anti-Viridian. His office wasn't a sterile showroom, it was a functioning command center. A massive whiteboard covered in complex algorithms and flowcharts dominated one wall. Another was lined with books ranging from quantum computing to Stoic philosophy. Damian, at 38, had built Nexus from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth worth billions. He did it not with handshakes and golf games, but with relentless innovation and an almost religious devotion to ethical integrity. He still wrote code. He still ate lunch with his junior engineers, and he still wore hoodies. For the past 6 months, Nexus Dynamics had been engaged in a partnership with Viridian Solutions. The prize was a $10 million contract for Viridian to develop a key software component for Nexus's next-generation logistics platform, codenamed Project Chimera. On paper, Viridian, led by their charismatic CEO Richard Sterling, was the perfect partner. They had the pedigree, the awards, and the slickest marketing team in the business. But for the last 3 weeks, Damian had felt a gnawing unease. The progress reports from Viridian were too polished. The data was too perfect. His gut, the same instinct that told him which startups to acquire and which market trends to follow, was screaming that something was wrong. So he did what he always did when in doubt. He dove into the raw data himself. For 72 hours straight, fueled by black coffee and a fierce need for the truth, Damian and his lead architect, a brilliant woman named Dr. Alani Bello, personally audited the code snippets and progress modules Viridian had delivered. What they found was horrifying. The code was a buggy, inefficient mess, cleverly disguised with falsified performance metrics. The progress they claimed was a complete fabrication. Viridian wasn't just behind schedule. They had built a hollow shell. They were taking his money and delivering a lie. They thought we wouldn't check, Alani had said, her voice a mixture of anger and disappointment. They thought you were just another suit, Damian, someone who only reads the executive summary. That was the insult that cut deepest. Damian called an emergency meeting with his legal team at 7 a.m. that Tuesday. The decision was swift and unanimous. They would terminate the contract immediately for breach of terms. The standard protocol was to let the lawyers handle it. A sterile email, a flurry of official notices. But this felt different. This was a betrayal of trust on a fundamental level. No, Damian said, standing up. I'm going to tell Richard myself, face to face. I want to see his face when he learns we actually looked under the hood. He didn't bother to change. His worn gray hoodie, faded jeans, and comfortable sneakers were his thinking clothes, his building clothes. They were the uniform of the man who created Nexus, not the sanitized icon on the cover of Forbes. He grabbed his phone and wallet, bypassed the executive elevator, and rode down with the morning crowd of coders and marketing assistants. Just another anonymous face in the company he had built. As he walked the 3 blocks to the Viridian Tower, a cool autumn breeze rustling the city's trees, he felt a strange sense of calm. The $10 million loss was a nuisance, but survivable. The real cost was the wasted time. But cutting a bad partner loose was always the right decision. He was doing them a favor, really. They just didn't know it yet. He pushed through the revolving glass doors into the Viridian lobby. It was exactly as he'd imagined. Cold, imposing, and filled with an air of self-importance. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. A massive, abstract sculpture that probably cost more than a teacher's salary stood in the center. At the far end was a long, white reception desk, manned by a man in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked less like a receptionist and more like a sentinel. This was Arthur Pendleton, Viridian's director of client relations, and a man whose entire world was about to be turned upside down. Arthur Pendleton believed in order. He believed in rules, protocol, and the clear, unassailable hierarchy of the corporate world. His position as director of client relations was, in his mind, the most critical checkpoint in the entire Viridian ecosystem. He was the gatekeeper who ensured that the pristine world of Richard Sterling and the executive floor was never disturbed by the unannounced, the unimportant, or the undesirable. His desk was a testament to this philosophy. Everything was at a perfect right angle. The keyboard, the monitor, the leather-bound blotter, the single, elegant pen. He judged people in milliseconds, a skill he prided himself on. A well-tailored suit, a firm handshake, a confident stride. These were the hallmarks of someone who mattered. When Damien Cross walked in, every one of Arthur's finely tuned alarms went off. The man's posture was relaxed, not deferential. His clothes were, to put it mildly, an affront. A hoodie? At the global headquarters of Viridian Solutions? It was unthinkable. Arthur immediately categorized him: lost delivery driver, misguided job applicant, or perhaps a disgruntled former employee. In any case, he was a deviation from the norm, and Arthur's job was to correct deviations. Damien approached the desk. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and even. "I'm here to see Richard Sterling." Arthur didn't even look up from his computer screen for a full 5 seconds, a deliberate power move he often employed. Finally, he lifted his gaze, his eyes sweeping over Damien in a clinical, dismissive appraisal. "Do you have an appointment?" Arthur asked, his tone clipped and cold. "No, I don't," Damien replied honestly. "But he will want to see me. Just tell him Damien Cross is here." Arthur's lips curled into a faint, condescending smirk. Damien Cross. The name meant nothing to him. He'd memorized the names of every major client, every board member, every potential investor. This name wasn't on any of his lists. It was just a name, and an unkempt man attached to it. "Mr. Sterling has a fully booked schedule," Arthur said, his voice dripping with finality. "He doesn't take unscheduled meetings. You can leave your information with me, and if his office deems it important, they will reach out to you." "I understand he's busy," Damien said, his patience still intact. "But this is a time-sensitive matter regarding Project Chimera. I assure you, he will want to hear what I have to say." The mention of Project Chimera gave Arthur a moment's pause. That was the big Nexus Dynamics contract, the one everyone was talking about. But surely anyone important from Nexus would be in a suit, flanked by assistants, with an appointment scheduled weeks in advance. This man had to be a low-level coder, or maybe a disgruntled contractor trying to bypass the proper channels. "All communication regarding active projects must go through the designated project managers," Arthur recited, the words flowing like a pre-recorded message. "If you have a grievance, you can submit it in writing to the project liaison." "I'm not a project manager, and I don't have a grievance to submit," Damien said, a flicker of frustration now entering his voice. "Look, can you just please call up to his office? Tell his assistant, I believe her name is Carol, that Damien Cross is in the lobby." This was a breach of protocol. Arthur did not exist to run errands for strangers. He was the guardian. His spine stiffened. "Sir, I've told you the procedure," Arthur said, his voice rising slightly. He stood up, using his height to try and subtly intimidate Damien. "We have a certain image to maintain here at Viridian. We can't just have anyone walking in off the street demanding to see the CEO." The implication was crystal clear. "Anyone like you." The phrase hung in the air, thick with prejudice. It was in the way Arthur's eyes scanned Damien's dark skin, his casual clothes, his very presence. Damien had faced this his whole life, The quiet assumption that he couldn't possibly be the one in charge, that he must be out of place. He'd hoped that a billion-dollar company and a cover story in Time magazine might have changed that. But here, in this marble mausoleum, he was just another black man being told he didn't belong. "I am not just anyone," Damien said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "And you are making a monumental mistake. For the last time, please call Mr. Sterling." The quiet intensity in Damien's voice should have been a warning, but Arthur was too blinded by his own arrogance. He saw it not as a warning, but as a challenge to his authority. "A mistake?" Arthur scoffed, a genuine, ugly laugh escaping his lips. "The only mistake here, sir, is your assumption that you can bypass our security and our policies. Now I am asking you to leave. If you do not, I will be forced to call security." He gestured toward a red button under his desk. Damien simply shook his head, a look of profound disappointment on his face. He'd come here to handle a business matter with professionalism, but it had devolved into this ugly, primitive dance of prejudice. "Don't bother," Damien said softly. "I believe your security will have bigger problems to deal with very soon." He pulled out his phone. Arthur watched, smugly satisfied. He thought Damien was calling a friend to complain, or perhaps a taxi to take him away. He was wrong. Damien wasn't making a call. He was sending a single pre-written email. The subject line was, "Contract termination, immediate effect." The body contained the formal notice, the legal clauses, and a link to the damning audit report compiled by his team. He hit send. The email went simultaneously to Richard Sterling, Viridian's entire board of directors, and their chief legal counsel. The deed was done. The $10 million cord had been officially cut. All that was left was the fallout, and Arthur Pendleton, in his magnificent ignorance, was standing directly at ground zero. Up on the 60th floor, in an office that overlooked the city like a king's balcony, Richard Sterling was having a fantastic morning. He had just gotten off the phone with a journalist, boasting about the symbiotic partnership with Nexus Dynamics. He'd used phrases like game-changing and unprecedented synergy. He had a golf game scheduled for 3 p.m. at his exclusive country club, the Oakwood Reserve. Life was good. His assistant Carol, a sharp and efficient woman in her late 50s, buzzed him on the intercom. "Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Arthur Pendleton from the front desk just called. He said there's a man named Damien Cross in the lobby demanding to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. Arthur says he's being rather insistent." Richard's blood ran cold. Damien Cross. Not a project manager. Not a vice president. The Damien Cross. The reclusive, genius founder and CEO of Nexus Dynamics. The man who never took meetings. The man who held the fate of their $10 million contract in his hands. Demanding to see him? Unannounced? "He's where?" Richard choked out, scrambling from his leather chair. "In the lobby, Richard. Arthur seems to be handling him." "Handling him?" Richard's voice shot up 2 octaves. "Oh, God. Oh, no. Carol, stall him. Tell Arthur not to let him leave. I'm coming down, now." Richard Sterling didn't use the executive elevator. He sprinted to the main elevator bank, jabbing the down button like his life depended on it, which, in a professional sense, it did. Damien Cross showing up unannounced was either phenomenally good news or apocalyptically bad news. There was no in-between. And knowing Arthur Pendleton's rigid, officious nature, Richard had a sinking feeling in his stomach that was turning into a full-blown panic. Down in the lobby, Arthur was enjoying his victory. The man in the hoodie was still standing there, looking at his phone, but his bluff had been called. Arthur had stood his ground. He had protected the integrity of Viridian. He was mentally composing the email he would send to his supervisor, detailing how he had professionally de-escalated a potential security situation. Just then, the elevator doors dinged open with an unusual urgency. Richard Sterling burst out, his usually immaculate silver hair disheveled, his face flushed with panic. He scanned the lobby frantically, his eyes wide. "Arthur, where is he?" Richard yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Arthur, stunned by the CEO's sudden and dramatic appearance, simply pointed a confused finger at Damien. "Mr. Sterling, this is the gentleman I was telling you about." "I was just explaining our visitor, Polly." He never got to finish the sentence. Richard Sterling's face, upon seeing Damien, went through a rapid series of transformations, from panic to recognition to a fawning, desperate relief. And then, as he registered the scene, Arthur standing guard, Damien looking on with a cold, unreadable expression, to absolute, gut-wrenching horror. "Mr. Cross!" Richard exclaimed, rushing forward with his hand outstretched. A painfully wide smile plastered on his face. "Damien! What an incredible surprise! Forgive my appearance, we weren't expecting you. To what do we owe the honor?" Damien ignored the outstretched hand. He simply looked at Richard, then glanced pointedly at Arthur, who was frozen in place, his face a mask of utter disbelief. The name Cross was now connecting in his brain with Nexus dynamics, and the gears were grinding with a terrible, screeching noise. "Richard," Damien said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth, "I just came by to tell you in person that our partnership is over." Richard's smile evaporated. "Over? What? What are you talking about? Project Chimera? I just got off the phone with Forbes. I told them—" "You told them a lie, Richard," Damien cut in. "Just like your team has been lying to us for months. We audited the code. We saw the falsified reports. You delivered nothing of value. So, as of about 3 minutes ago, the contract is terminated. My lawyers have already sent the official notice. Check your email." Richard fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling. He saw the notification preview. From Damien Cross. Subject: contract termination. The blood drained from his face. $10 million. Gone. Their stock price, their reputation, all gone. "Damien, please," he stammered, his voice pleading. "There must be a misunderstanding, a mistake. We can fix this. Let's go up to my office. We can talk. Have a drink." "No," Damien said, his voice like chipping ice. "There's nothing to talk about. The decision was made this morning. Coming here. This was just meant to be a professional courtesy, a difficult conversation between two CEOs. But it turns out I couldn't even get in the door." He finally turned his gaze fully onto Arthur Pendleton. Arthur felt that gaze like a physical blow. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was pitying. "Your director of client relations here," Damien continued, his voice calm but carrying across the entire lobby, "explained to me that I don't fit the image you're trying to maintain, that people like me can't just walk in and expect to be seen." Richard Sterling looked at Arthur as if seeing a ghost. The color of his face shifted from pale white to a blotchy, furious red. The full scope of the disaster was crashing down on him. It wasn't just that they'd lost the contract. It was how they'd lost it. It was the insult, the humiliation, the sheer idiotic prejudice of it all. Arthur opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed, his world crumbling in real time. The man he had dismissed, condescended to, threatened with security, was the most important business contact his company had. He had not been guarding the gate. He had been standing on a trap door, and Damien Cross had just pulled the lever. "So thank him, Richard," Damien said, giving a final dismissive nod towards Arthur. "He helped confirm I made the right choice. A company's culture starts at the front door, and yours apparently is rotten to the core." With that, Damien Cross turned and walked out of the lobby, leaving behind the wreckage of a multi-million-dollar deal and two men whose careers had just been irrevocably shattered. The automatic glass doors slid open for him without judgment and closed behind him with a soft, final hiss. The silence Damien left behind was heavier and more oppressive than any sound. It was the sound of a bomb detonating without a flash, the shock wave rippling outwards in devastating silence. For a full 10 seconds, Richard Sterling and Arthur Pendleton stood frozen in a tableau of corporate death. Then Richard moved. It wasn't a gradual turn. It was a violent, convulsive jerk, as if his strings had been cut and then reattached by a vengeful puppeteer. He faced Arthur, and the panic on his face had been replaced by a volcanic rage. His eyes, which moments before had been pleading with Damien, were now narrowed slits of pure fury. "You!" Richard hissed, the word itself a condemnation. He took a step closer to Arthur, his voice dropping to a terrifying, trembling whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Arthur was speechless. His mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of a gray hoodie, the name Damian Cross, and the number $10,000 flashing like a broken neon sign. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know. He didn't have an appointment. The protocol. Protocol, Richard roared, the sound echoing off the marble and glass. A few employees scurrying through the lobby froze in their tracks, staring. You think I care about your pathetic little visitor protocol right now? That was Damian Cross, the man whose company was about to be our biggest client, the man who just single-handedly gutted our entire fourth quarter projection. He was shouting now, spit flying from his lips. He didn't fit the image? Our image is now a smoking crater because of you. You and your cheap, power-tripping, prejudiced little rulebook. Richard's phone began to vibrate violently in his hand. It was the CFO. He ignored it. It immediately began vibrating again. The board members, the lawyers, the whole world was finding out. He was dressed, Arthur stammered, his defense sounding feeble even to his own ears. He's a billionaire tech genius, you idiot. He could have shown up in a clown suit and your job was to roll out a red carpet and call me. Your one job was to know who matters, and you failed on a scale I can't even begin to comprehend. Richard stabbed a trembling finger at Arthur's chest. Pack your things, you're fired. Get out of my sight. Get out of my building. Now. He turned to the stunned security guard who had been watching the scene unfold. Frank, escort Mr. Pendleton to his office. He is to take only his personal belongings. No company property. Then walk him out of this building. His access is revoked, effective immediately. The walk to his office was the longest walk of Arthur Pendleton's life. It was a walk of shame amplified by the open-plan office design. Every head popped up over every cubicle divider. Phones were already lighting up with messages. The jungle drums of office gossip were beating a frantic, joyous rhythm at his demise. His colleagues, who had both envied and feared his rigid authority, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. He was a dead man walking. He threw his few personal items, a framed photo of his wife, a silver pen set, a ficus plant, into a cardboard box. Frank the security guard stood impassively by the door, a silent, uniformed reaper. As Arthur walked out, box in hand, he could already hear the whispers, the barely suppressed laughter. His reign as the petty tyrant of the lobby was over. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was in full-blown crisis mode. He stormed back into the elevator, jabbing the button for the 60th floor. The moment the doors closed, he was on the phone with his head of PR, Eleanor Vance. Kill the Forbes story, he barked into the phone. Kill it now. I don't care what you have to do, and get ready to draft a statement. It's bad, Eleanor. It's a Category 5 disaster. He spent the next hour locked in his office, which now felt less like a castle and more like a prison. His phone was a relentless torrent of bad news. The board was calling for an emergency meeting. Their stock, which hadn't even opened for trading yet, was already projected to plummet in pre-market activity based on rumors alone. The legal team confirmed the termination clause was ironclad. Viridian had no recourse. They had been caught red-handed. The worst part was the humiliation. Damian Cross hadn't just fired them, he had exposed them. Richard Sterling, who prided himself on his relationships and his reputation, had allowed his company to be defined by the bigotry of a mid-level manager. He had fostered a culture where a man like Arthur Pendleton could feel so empowered in his prejudice that he could turn away a billionaire CEO. He slumped into his chair, the adrenaline giving way to a cold, heavy dread. He looked out the window at the Nexus Dynamics Tower, a silent, gleaming monolith that seemed to mock him. This wasn't just a lost deal, it was a fatal wound. And as he sat there, staring into the abyss, he had no idea that the bleeding was only just beginning. The immediate fallout was a shock, but the true karma was still gathering on the horizon, ready to break as a storm of public opinion. In the modern world, a story doesn't end when the players leave the stage. It begins when the first phone is lifted. Sarah Jenkins, a junior marketing associate at Viridian, had been on her way to get a coffee when the confrontation in the lobby started. She was young, ambitious, and part of a generation that instinctively documents everything. As Arthur Pendleton's voice grew louder and more condescending, she had discreetly angled her phone from behind a large potted plant. She filmed the whole thing. Arthur's smug dismissal, his threat to call security, Richard Sterling's panicked arrival, the devastating revelation, and Damian Cross's calm final words. She captured the raw, unfiltered ugliness of the moment. For an hour, Sarah sat at her desk, the video burning a hole in her phone's memory. She knew Arthur was a pompous jerk, but this was different. This was wrong on a level that transcended office politics. She thought about her own career, about the risks of being a whistleblower. But then she thought about Damian Cross's face, not angry, but weary, as if this was a burden he had carried his entire life. With a deep breath, she sent the video file from an anonymous email address to a well-known tech blogger, Jason the Digital Disruptor Hayes, with the simple subject line, "This is what happens at Viridian Solutions." Jason Hayes received hundreds of tips a day, but this one was different. He recognized Damian Cross instantly. He recognized the raw, undeniable stench of corporate bigotry. He knew this wasn't just a story, it was a bombshell. He verified the video's authenticity through a source inside Viridian, and by 1 p.m., he published it on his blog and Twitter feed. The explosion was instantaneous. Within 30 minutes, the video had 1 million views. The hashtag #ViridianGate was born and began trending globally. It was picked up by major news outlets, Reuters, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal. The clip of Arthur saying, "We have a certain image to maintain here," played on a loop on cable news networks, juxtaposed with a picture of Damian Cross from his Forbes cover. The public reaction was a tidal wave of fury. Viridian's social media accounts were flooded with thousands of angry comments. "Fired my Viridian stock faster than they fired their racist manager. Hey, Viridian Solutions, your image is now permanently stained with bigotry. Congratulations. Damian Cross is a class act. He built an empire and still gets treated like he doesn't belong. This is why we still have so much work to do." For Arthur Pendleton, the karma was swift and brutal. He arrived home still reeling from being fired, trying to formulate a way to tell his wife, Brenda. Before he could get the words out, his phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends, family, old college acquaintances, all sending him links to the video. He watched it, horrified. The camera angle was unflattering, capturing every sneer, every ounce of his arrogance. He wasn't just an anonymous, fired employee. He was a villain in a viral video. His full name was in the articles. His LinkedIn profile was being shared, commented on by thousands of strangers calling him a racist, a fool, an embarrassment. By dinner time, he was a pariah. Brenda watched the video, her face pale. "Arthur, what did you do?" she whispered, looking at him as if he were a stranger. The fallout spread beyond him. The Oakwood Reserve Country Club, where Richard Sterling was supposed to be playing golf, began receiving calls from members. The club, which prided itself on its modern, inclusive image, had several high-profile minority members. The pressure mounted. By the end of the day, the club's board suggested that Richard Sterling suspend his membership indefinitely to avoid further scandal. The financial bleeding at Viridian was catastrophic. The next morning, when the stock market opened, VSN, Viridian Solutions, stock plummeted. It didn't just dip, it cliff-dived. The stock lost 40% of its value in the first hour of trading, billions of dollars in market capitalization erased. The reason wasn't just the lost $10 million contract, it was the stain of the scandal. Investors were terrified. Who would want to partner with a company whose culture was so toxic and broken that it could publicly humiliate a figure like Damian Cross? The hard karma wasn't just that Arthur lost his job. It was that his identity was publicly and permanently redefined. He was no longer Arthur Pendleton director. He was the Viridian manager, a walking meme for corporate prejudice. His career in any public-facing role was over. The digital wildfire he had started with a single ignorant decision had consumed his past, his present, and his future. The viral video and the subsequent stock market crash were just the beginning. The incident acted as a catalyst, pulling back the curtain on a deep-seated systemic rot within Viridian Solutions that Richard Sterling had either ignored or been blissfully unaware of. Viridian Gate wasn't just a one-off event. It was a symptom of a disease, In the days that followed, the story grew legs. Jessica Riley, a tenacious investigative journalist from the New York Times, started digging. She set up a confidential tip line for current and former Veridian employees, and the floodgates opened. The stories that poured in painted a grim picture. They weren't all as dramatic as Arthur Pendleton blocking a billionaire, but they were insidious. There were stories of women being passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified male colleagues from the golfing club. There were accounts from Black and Hispanic engineers whose ideas were routinely dismissed in meetings, only to be presented later by white managers as their own. One former employee shared an internal email chain where executives joked about their diversity and inclusion seminar being a waste of a good afternoon. Jessica Riley's expose was published the following Sunday, a front-page story titled, "The House That Sterling Built, Inside the Toxic Culture of Veridian Solutions." It was a methodical, damning indictment of the company. It detailed not just racial bias, but a pervasive culture of arrogance, cronyism, and ethical corner-cutting. The failed Project Chimera wasn't an anomaly. It was standard operating procedure. Veridian had been winning contracts for years based on a glittering reputation while delivering mediocre and sometimes fraudulent work. The article was the nail in the coffin. Veridian's other major clients, who had been nervously watching the initial scandal unfold, now had the evidence they needed to act. First, Omnicorp, a massive manufacturing conglomerate, announced they were pulling their $25 million cloud services contract, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. Then the federal government put a multi-million-dollar defense contract under review. One by one, the pillars holding up Veridian's financial empire began to crumble. The company was now in a death spiral. The board of directors, initially supportive of Richard Sterling, now turned on him. They had been humiliated, their personal wealth tied to the company's stock had been decimated, and their reputations were on the line. They called another emergency meeting. This time, Richard wasn't leading it. He was the subject of it. "This happened on your watch, Richard," boomed one of the oldest board members, a grizzled industrialist named Marcus Thorne. "This culture of rot, of lies, it all flows from the top. You built this company on a foundation of sand, and now the tide has come in." Richard Sterling, a man who had commanded rooms his entire life, was reduced to a stammering, defeated figure. He tried to blame Arthur Pendleton, calling him a rogue employee, but no one was buying it. Arthur was a product of the environment Richard had created. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted. Richard Sterling was forced to resign as CEO of the company he had founded. The consequences for Arthur, meanwhile, continued to mount. He was untouchable, a pariah in the corporate world. Recruiters wouldn't return his calls. His name was a red flag on any background check. He applied for lower-level jobs, management positions at smaller companies, but the moment they Googled his name, the conversation was over. The shame was relentless. He had to sell their large suburban home to cover their mounting debts, moving into a small rented apartment. His wife, Brenda, eventually left him, unable to live with the constant shadow of his public disgrace. Arthur Pendleton, the man who so fiercely guarded the door to the elite, now found himself locked out of society itself. He had lost his job, his wealth, his reputation, and his family, all because he judged a man by his hoodie instead of his character. The hard karma was complete. It wasn't just a firing, it was the total dismantling of two men's lives in the implosion of a corporate giant, all stemming from a single ugly moment of prejudice in a pristine marble lobby. The world had seen the rot, and it had acted decisively. While Veridian Solutions was consumed by the firestorm, Damian Cross was busy doing what he did best, building. He had watched the public fallout with a heavy heart. He took no joy in the destruction of Veridian or the personal ruin of Richard Sterling and Arthur Pendleton. Their fate was a tragedy of their own making, a cautionary tale he hoped others would learn from. For Damian, the incident was not a victory, but a profound and painful reminder of the invisible barriers that still existed, even at the highest echelons of power. He could have simply moved on, found a new contractor, and forgotten the whole ugly affair. But that wasn't his way. He saw the viral moment not as an endpoint, but as an opportunity. a chance to channel the global attention into something constructive. 2 weeks after Brees Charger Viridian Gate exploded, Damian Cross did something he rarely did. He agreed to a live primetime television interview with veteran journalist Anderson Cooper. He walked onto the set not in a suit, but in his now famous gray hoodie. "Mr. Cross," Cooper began, "the world has been captivated by what happened. People are calling it a great story of karma. Do you see it that way?" Damian shook his head. "I don't see it as a story about karma," he said, his voice thoughtful and measured. "I see it as a story about a broken system. What happened to me was visible because of who I am, but it happens every single day to countless others who don't have a platform. It happens to brilliant engineers who are told their ideas aren't the right fit. It happens to talented entrepreneurs who can't get funding because their appearance doesn't match a preconceived notion of success. The manager at that door wasn't the disease, he was a symptom." He then looked directly into the camera, and his message was clear and powerful. "The issue isn't what people wear. The issue is the lens through which we see them. Talent does not have a dress code. Innovation does not have a skin color. We, in the tech industry, claim to be building the future. But we can't build a better future using the broken tools of past prejudices." The interview went viral for a different reason. It was hailed as a masterclass in leadership, turning a moment of personal insult into a call for systemic change. But Damian wasn't finished. The very next day, Nexus Dynamics issued a press release that sent shockwaves through the industry. Damian was personally launching the Nexus Foundation, a $250 million venture capital fund with a singular mission: to invest exclusively in tech startups founded by women, people of color, and entrepreneurs from other underrepresented backgrounds. The press release stated, "We are not looking for founders who fit the image. We are looking for founders who can change the world. The Nexus Foundation will not have a front door with a gatekeeper. It will have an open door for anyone with a brilliant idea and the courage to build it." It was a revolutionary move. Damian was using his capital and his platform to actively build a more equitable table, rather than just complaining about the old one. He put Dr. Alani Bello, his brilliant lead architect, in charge of the foundation. They weren't just writing checks, they were providing mentorship, access to Nexus's resources, and the kind of support that money alone couldn't buy. The story of Viridian Solutions became a case study taught in business schools about the catastrophic cost of a toxic culture. The company was eventually acquired for pennies on the dollar by a competitor, its gleaming tower a monument to its own hubris. Damian Cross never saw Arthur Pendleton or Richard Sterling again. He didn't need to. His response was his resolution. He had faced a locked door, and instead of just forcing it open, he had chosen to build 1,000 new ones for others to walk through. From his office on the 55th floor, looking out at the city, he knew his work was far from over. But he had taken a moment of ugly, personal prejudice and transformed it into a legacy of opportunity, proving that the most powerful response to being blocked is not to tear down, but to build something better in its place. 3 years. 3 years is a lifetime. For some, it is a period of growth, promotions, and new beginnings. For Arthur Pendleton, it was a period of erasure. The man he had been, the director with the tailored suit, the corner office view, the smug sense of authority, was gone. He had been scrubbed from existence not by time, but by shame. In his place was a quiet, graying man who worked the evening shift at the Elmwood Park Public Library. The library was his monastery and his prison. Its silence was a comfort, a stark contrast to the ringing phones and frantic shouting that had marked his last day at Viridian. Here, the only hierarchy was the Dewey Decimal System. No one cared about his suit, his shoes, or the non-existent appointment in his calendar. They just wanted to know where to find books on gardening or how to use the microfilm reader. He had traded a 6-figure salary for minimum wage, a corporate Amex for a well-worn bus pass, and his ambition for anonymity. The anger he had felt in the first year had long since curdled into a kind of hollow resignation. He had spent months blaming Damian Cross, blaming the girl who filmed the video, blaming Richard Sterling, blaming everyone but the man in the mirror. But the lonely nights and quiet hours surrounded by the collected knowledge of the world had a way of stripping a man of his delusions. He would sometimes catch his reflection in the darkened glass of the library windows and see the truth. He saw the ugly sneer, the unearned arrogance. He saw the prejudice he had mistaken for professionalism. The viral video hadn't lied. It had simply shown him who he was. His new life was a penance of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was the averted gaze of a former neighbor at the grocery store. It was the discovery that his name was now a verb in some online circles. Don't get yourself Pendletoned at the job interview. It was the profound, aching loneliness of a man who had built his identity on a foundation of status, only to have it all washed away. One rainy Tuesday evening, the library was nearly empty. An elderly man dozed over a newspaper, and a few students were scattered among the tables, their faces illuminated by the glow of their laptops. The bell over the door chimed, and a young woman rushed in, shaking the rain from her jacket. She was probably in her early 20s, with bright, intelligent eyes and a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She radiated an energy that felt alien in the quiet halls of the library. She approached his circulation desk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a respectful whisper. "I know you're closing in an hour, but could you point me to the business and grant writing section? I'm trying to polish a presentation for a very important application." Arthur gave her a tired but genuine smile. Helping people find what they were looking for was the one part of his job he truly enjoyed. It was simple. It was useful. "Of course," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Aisle 7B. If you need help with market research databases, I can show you how to log in." "That would be amazing, thank you," she said, relief washing over her face. For the next 45 minutes, Arthur helped her. Her name was Maya, and she was an engineering graduate from the local state university. She was brilliant. As she spoke about her project, a low-cost water purification system using a new type of graphene filter she'd developed, Arthur felt a flicker of his old self. Not the arrogant director, but the man who understood structure, presentations, and the art of persuasion. He saw flaws in her pitch deck, pointed out weaknesses in her financial projections, and suggested ways to phrase her mission statement more powerfully. He was, for the first time in years, using the skills that had once made him successful. "This is incredible," Maya said, furiously typing notes. "You're better than my faculty advisor. How did you learn all this?" A bitter laugh almost escaped him. "I used to be in the corporate world," he said vaguely, the understatement of a lifetime. "A long time ago." He looked at the name of her startup on the title slide of her presentation, Aquanova. Below it was a line, "Seeking seed round funding from the Nexus Foundation." The name hit Arthur like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. The Nexus Foundation. Damian Cross's foundation. The $250 million fund born from the ashes of Arthur's own career. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the past and present had collided right there, in the hushed quiet of the library. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Nexus Foundation," he repeated. "That's Damian Cross's initiative. It's notoriously competitive." Maya's eyes lit up. "It is, but it's also the best. It's the only one that felt real. They don't care where I went to school or who my father knows. They held an open call for proposals, and they're judging purely on the merit of the idea and its potential impact. It's a true meritocracy." She leaned in, her voice filled with a hopeful passion that Arthur hadn't felt in a decade. "Do you know the story behind why he started it? They say he was once blocked from entering a meeting by some old-school manager who didn't like the way he looked. The guy got him so wrong, and it ended up costing the company everything. So Mr. Cross built a foundation with an open door, just to prove a point that talent can come from anywhere." She was telling him his own story, the cautionary tale that had defined his ruin, but she was telling it from the other side. To her, it wasn't a story of failure and shame. It was a creation myth. It was a story of hope. Arthur felt a strange calm settle over him. There was no anger, no bitterness. There was only a profound, crushing, and strangely cleansing sense of clarity. He was looking at the direct, tangible result of his actions. His horrible mistake, his moment of blind prejudice, had created this. It had led to the creation of a system that was now giving this brilliant young woman a chance she might never have had otherwise. He had been the dragon at the gate, and in slaying him, the hero had created a path for 1,000 others. He did not tell her who he was. To do so would be to taint her hope with his shame, a selfish act he was no longer capable of. Instead, he took a deep breath and gave her the best advice he had ever given anyone. "Your technology is revolutionary, Maya," he said, his voice clear and firm. "Lead with that. Put a picture of the filter prototype on slide 2. Show, don't just tell. And when you get in that room, remember that you belong there. Don't ever let anyone make you feel for 1 second that you don't." The words came from the deepest part of his regret. He was giving her the advice he wished he could go back in time and give himself. When Maya finally packed up to leave, she turned to him, her face beaming. "Thank you," she said, her sincerity absolute. "I don't even know your name." "It's Arthur," he said quietly. "Well, Arthur, thank you. You may have just changed my life." She walked out into the rain, a beacon of potential. Arthur watched her go, then slowly began the closing duties, shutting down the computers and turning off the lights. In the silence of the empty library, he was alone with the echoes of his past. But for the first time, they weren't screaming at him. They were whispering a story of consequence, a story of a locked door that, by being slammed shut, had somehow opened 1,000 others. He had lost everything, but the world had gained a Maya, and in that strange, painful calculus, he finally found a sliver of peace. The story of Damian Cross and Arthur Pendleton is more than just a shocking tale of karma. It's a powerful lesson for our time. It reminds us that a person's worth is not determined by the clothes they wear, the color of their skin, or whether they fit into our narrow expectations. True value lies in character, integrity, and talent, qualities that can be easily missed if we only look at the surface. Arthur Pendleton's prejudice cost his company everything. Not just a $10 million deal, but its reputation, its future, and its very existence. In contrast, Damian Cross took a moment of profound disrespect and used it as fuel to create positive change, investing in others who have been unfairly judged. This story is a mirror, forcing us to ask ourselves, who are the gatekeepers in our own lives, and what brilliant opportunities might we be blocking with our own biases? What did you think about the hard karma Arthur and his company faced? Was it justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another real-life story of justice and consequence. Thank you for listening.